Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar series on conversations on development management. In the past, we've had webinars on relevance of management for social sector organizations, management challenges of social sector organizations, finance and compliance challenges of SSOs, and reimagining management education for the social sector. In today's webinar, we are going to take a look at the social sector landscape and try to understand the different kinds of organizations that we see in the social sector. So we have Professor M.S. Sriram with us for the webinar today. Professor Sriram needs no introduction. He's a faculty member of IIM Bangalore. He has written extensively on financial inclusion, microfinance, and cooperatives. He serves on the boards of AU Small Finance Bank, NDDB Dairy Services, Selco Solar Private Limited, and others. He's also a trustee of Pratham Books, Dastkar Andhra, and Sanket Trust. Professor Sriram also served on several committees set up by the RBI, NABARD, and the Government of India. Professor Sriram, we have several participants today who are interested in understanding broadly the kind of organizations that are there in the social sector, right? We think of, we tend to call all organizations as NGOs or social sector and so on. So can we start with understanding what kind of diversity do we see in social sector organizations and how can we classify them?
Thank you very much, Annapurna, for this introduction. I start with a disclaimer. I'm no longer on the board of NDDB Dairy Services. The rest of the introduction was fine. That needs to be updated. That's the only thing. Let me start by thanking APU and Annapurna, Gopi, and others for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this conversation. It's always a pleasure to interact with people, particularly young people. So broadly, I saw the teaser that was put on LinkedIn, which said, "How do you manage an organization that has purposes, that pursues a purpose beyond profit?" So let me start by looking at that phrase and say that unlike organizations that have profit as a primary purpose, social purpose organizations or enterprises are much more complex. Even though we think corporate organizations which undertake complex manufacturing processes and undertake complex projects are quite complicated, but social sector organizations are much more complicated than that, not because of the complexity of operations, but because of the multiple objectives that social sector organizations try to deliver. They try to be what in Telugu is said, Andariki Manchivadu, which is trying to be good to everybody, which means you need to be good to stakeholders, you're good to employees, you're good to your grant makers, and so on. So, therefore, unlike a corporate entity or a for-profit entity, which is measured on a single purpose, which is how much of profit have you delivered. And of course, the interpretation of profit could change. Sometimes people are taking a long horizon. Sometimes people are interpreting profits by way of market share, market dominance, and so on. There are multiple ways in which potential profits are assessed. But the only singular thing is what is the return that you're going to give to the shareholders. As against that, the social sector organizations, everybody keeps asking a question as to how relevant are you to me. And it is complex essentially because of the multi-objective that is there in a social sector organization, and several times these objectives are internally contradictory. So I'll try and look at that as the complexity of managing social sector organizations using the form or using the lens of organizational form. So let me sort of look at the various forms of organization that we have, and then look at the purposes that they serve, and we will take questions as we go along, and what is a relevant form of organization, the appropriate organization for a particular type of activity, and so on. We'll come to that later. Now let me start at the one end of the spectrum, which is the market-based institutions or the for-profit institutions. For-profit institutions are usually incorporated as a proprietorship, limited liability partnership, private limited company, or a public limited company, or a public limited company that is listed. So that's the range that we have. But the most prevalent organization that we have is a company which is possibly registered as a public limited company, and most likely what we see regularly or what is visible is a listed public limited company. Now, one nice thing about a listed public limited company or a for-profit company is it is, as I told you earlier, it is only looking at profits and nothing else. If organizations like ITC or any other organization say we are a triple bottom line organization, they are other two bottom lines are in addition to the primary bottom line, which is profit. No listed company can say I have done great on environment, I've done great on people, but sorry, my profits are bad. They will be punished. So in one sense, that's the bottom line. If push comes to shove, what is it that you are going to do? You are going to look at profits. So because there is a singularity of purpose, the form of organization or evaluating the organization or looking at the efficiency of the organization becomes rather simple because you are only measuring something which is very tangible and visible, which is profits, right? Now, that is an elegant form of for-profit enterprises, and the for-profit enterprises has its own ecosystem. It has independent evaluation being done by the statutory auditors who are accountable to the general body at large and not just to the management. It has rating agencies who are accountable to not only investors but potential investors of debt. It has stock exchanges looking at their performance and filings that you need to make. It has transparency norms, it has disclosure norms, etc., etc. So, therefore, the gaze on a listed public sector enterprise is not just by just the shareholders or the employees, it is much more, including potential shareholders and so on. So, that is a form of organization which is elegant because it has evolved over a period of time and built in an ecosystem which measures what it ought to deliver, which is profits. So let's park it there. Now, when we come to the social sector organizations, then we are saying, oh, well, there is a purpose beyond just the profits, right? The moment you say that there is a purpose just beyond profits, and sometimes the purpose is more important than profits, then we move into a slightly complicated zone. In this talk, I will restrict myself to enterprises and I will not look at organizations which are in the activist space because that's a different kettle of fish altogether. Let me sort of restrict myself to organizations which are broadly in the commercial space, not necessarily in the profit making space, but organizations which have a commercial exchange, which have a buy and sell and a market intervention objective. So I'll sort of restrict it. And towards the end, if you have questions, I can even get into the activist organizations and their forms and so on. But for the initial presentation, I'll restrict myself to the organizations or enterprises which have some sort of a transaction and trading, right? Now, what are the possibilities if you have a purpose beyond profits? One way is to have it as a for-profit enterprise, but signal your public purpose. Signal and keep saying that, oh, you are also for the other thing, and you constantly demonstrate it. One example of organization for profit which has a public purpose is an organization called Patagonia, which operates in the US. It's a worldwide corporation which does adventure gear, a whole lot of other things. And they say we have to be ecologically sensitive. In fact, their Black Friday advertisement says don't buy a product. And they constantly say there are not only 3 R's, but there are 5 R's: reuse, refuse, reuse, recycle, reimagine, replace, and so on. I mean, they're basically saying that you repair, so not replace is the last thing. You repair and reuse and so on. So they even say that if you're shorts that you bought from Patagonia is torn, you send it to us, we'll repair and send it. Don't buy a new pair of shorts because. So it's a for-profit organization, but it's so clearly articulated its purpose. The moment they move out of the purpose, people at large will start questioning their purpose. So one way is remaining a for-profit and signaling that you are you have a purpose beyond that, and sticking to it and constantly reaffirming the non-profit or the beyond profit agenda. That's one. So you're operating within the for-profit framework, but you're very clearly. Second example within India is Selco Solar Private Limited. Selco is a private limited company. It's not a listed company, closely held, but it has within its memorandum of association and articles of association that it would never distribute dividends. It has a shareholders agreement that they would never work for profit, right? And since I also sit on the board without violating the privacy norms, I could also disclose that once in a while, if Selco makes excessive profits, we ask, why are you making so much of profit? Why is the benefit not going back to the customers who are who are the poor who are putting solar panels on their rooftops and so on? So that is the second. So you're incorporated as a for-profit, but very clearly signaling to the outside world, and that's your way of controlling excessive profiteering, that you constantly keep telling that, I'm working for a purpose even though I'm a for-profit organization. It's very difficult to manage this, essentially because technically you can make the switch anytime. A good example, for instance, is what happened to Fab India when the intergenerational change of leadership happened. John Bissell, who set up Fab India, kept on saying that I am all about artisans. He said we need not grow and so on. When William Bissell took over, not that William Bissell did not try to stick to the social purpose that was articulated by his father, but somewhere down the line, he realized that unless you have adequate market share and presence, you will be an insignificant organization, and started growing the markets, and therefore they moved away from the core purpose and started articulating more of turnover and profits and so on. Now, can we hold Fab India responsible for betraying the vision? Not at all, because Fab India was a for-profit organization right from the beginning, and therefore by incorporation it has no accountability to the society at large apart from the required accountability as per law. So therefore the next generation of leadership is well within its rights in what it did, and possibly it is also an interesting idea to expand the markets and then develop handloom and artisanal sector by providing market opportunities. It's a different way of looking at the same agenda. So, but we can see that between Patagonia and Fab India, there is a somewhat nuanced difference where Patagonia does not talk about profits. Fab India does talk about profits, but also talks about artisans. So it is possible for you to incorporate something as for profit and have a purpose overlaid on it. And usually, if you sort of get bigger and get listed, it is quite likely that the purpose will get diluted, because you will never be asked questions in a shareholder meeting about the purpose. One or two might ask, but most of them would be asked, what is the ROA and return on investment, and what is my return on capital employed and so on. So that is one. Second is for-profit corporations not only signaling that they are for a purpose, but also getting certified for the purpose. This is like benefit corporations, wherein you are intrinsically a for-profit corporation, but in the memorandum itself, you say that I have a particular purpose, and for the profits, I get my auditors come and audit. For the purpose, I'll get a B Corp sort of a certification or a fair trade sort of a certification to ensure that there is a third-party engagement. Now, the only difference between a standard audit and an audit which a B Corp or a fair trade does is standard audit is statutory and mandatory. A B Corp audit is voluntary, and you are subjecting yourself to that evaluation. So you might at some point in time choose not to subject yourself to that evaluation, but there is a mechanism for independent evaluation of the way that you're doing as far as the purpose evaluation is concerned. These two are broadly within the for-profit space. Now, you can, social businesses, which is an idea propagated by Muhammad Yunus after he got the Nobel, is also broadly in the same, because there also he says that we should be equitable, we should be nice to the communities, we should be good to our employees, we should solve a social problem using a commercial framework, and we should do it with joy. There are 7 principles of UNICEF social business. There also, it is broadly for profit, but there is no dividend distribution, at least as far as the principles are concerned. So that also falls into this arena. The next set of organizational choice that we have is what we call as collectives. Collectives are people coming together to solve their economic problem and find a solution. What do collectives do? Collectives have moved the basic fulcrum of the organization, the centrality of the organization, from profits in proportion to the capital to profits in proportion to the turnover patronage that they give. So that's what collectives do. As far as collectives are concerned, we have two sub nuances. One is what is incorporated as cooperative societies, that is also a collective, and what is incorporated as farmer producer organizations. That's the second thing. One is incorporated in the Cooperative Societies Act, other is incorporated in the Companies Act under a special chapter called the Farmer Producer Companies. Now, both these organizations operate on a principle of mutuality and sharing of profits based on how much business or how much patronage you give to the organization, while being democratic as far as the control is concerned, and not rewarding the capital excessively, which means your capital gets a limited return, possibly equivalent to what you would get as a fixed deposit interest in a bank. Right? Now, these are very interesting organizations. In fact, the collectives came as a response to the excessive distortions that the for-profit corporations had, saying that, why should capital always get the return? Why can't something else get the return? Now, the only problem with collectives is that it is based on 3 independent things which are moving in different directions. One is it is based on patronage. How much of transactions do you do with the cooperative? Suppose I'm a member of Amul, how much of milk do I pour to Amul cooperative every day? If I'm a member of Janta Bazaar set of a consumer cooperative, how much of goods do I buy? If I'm a member of Urulangal labor cooperative, how much of labor do I contribute? So that is what is called patronage. Second is control, which is one person, one vote, democratic control, right? And the third is how much of capital would I put into this? Because I'm not rewarding capital, there is no incentive for me to put in more capital. So therefore, it is limited by capital. If I give more patronage, I don't have a greater say in the organization, and it has an equivalent democratic control. And therefore, these 3 are sort of not aligning with each other very well. And therefore, when cooperatives succeed, they succeed in spite of these 3 internally contradictory principles. And therefore, it is much more difficult for a cooperative to succeed. That's something that we need to. And we'll also figure out that when a cooperative succeeds commercially, the questions are being asked, does it remain a cooperative? I mean, there's constant question as, is there a concept of too big to be a cooperative? If you're too big, are you continuing to be a mutual? Because mutuality is about small communities, you know each other, you're working for each other and so on. If you are 500,000 people, are you working for each other, or is it as good as the population? So that's the question. So therefore, is it too big to be a cooperative is a question. And there's an interesting thing that if you're commercially successful and making lots of profit, possibly you've given your cooperative principles secondary status. It's also possible that if there is a successful cooperative, it becomes irrelevant because the market also starts behaving like a cooperative, which means it starts giving a fair rent for the problem that you were trying to address. So in one sense, that's a middle space where we are collecting. There's one problem with the cooperatives that since it is user based, users have their own trade, and therefore, who will sit on the governance while carrying out their own trade and manage a complex organization? There is always a question of, if I am a milk pourer in a village in Kheda or Anand district, would I have the time to go and sit on the board of Anand Milk Union Limited or on the board of Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation? If I have the time, would I be doing justice to the dairying business at my household level? So in a way, it then becomes governed by people who have the time, which means that dairying is not their primary occupation, but running organizations or politics is their primary occupation. So that's where politics enters. In fact, we should not be surprised if politics enters cooperatives, because it has democratic control and it has people coming and managing the operations while not getting economic benefit. And these two irrational things are done only by people who are in politics. And obviously, people who are in politics have mastered the one man, one person, one vote form of governance, right? So that is collectives for you. It is internally contradictory, but it's a very charming organization where, when it's successful, gives a fair amount of transfers the profits from an investor to a patron, to a user of services. So that's the beauty of that. So that is the collective. The third is not-for-profits. In the not-for-profit space, we have Section 8 companies, we have trusts, and we have public societies. These are what one would call as unreasonable organizations. The reason why we call them unreasonable organizations is that they get funding from a set of people who are interested in the cause, and they do not raise resources from the users directly, or if they do raise resources from the users directly, then they're ready to become commercial, right? So these are organizations where feasibility is not established. There's an element of subsidy. You're looking at inclusion of people who are completely excluded from the arena. If you look at the early days of microfinance, they were all not-for-profit. Once the commercial viability of microfinance was established, they all became for-profit. So that's the journey. So this is not-for-profit for ideas which are not tested, which are not viable, but we think are desirable, and there are people who are willing to back up. And these people who are willing to back up are not venture capitalists who are also backing up innovative ideas, right? But when venture capitalists are backing up innovative ideas, they're expecting that to be a profit. Here they're saying possibly it may not result in a profit. Let's try it out. So that is the third form of organization. So broadly, these are the 3 or 4 classifications of organizations that we have looked at. Now, as I told you, in the for-profit, there is an entire ecosystem which makes it work. Rating agencies, audit firms, listing, analysts, regulators. All of them are not working on the roles of the organization. They are working on their own, because the ecosystem has a way in which they can compensate them. So ecosystem compensates it because there is a lot of activity going on in the for-profit sector. When it comes to social business and benefit corporations, then there is this, when we talk about voluntary certification, the certification process becomes more complex. Unlike the audit standards, which are standardized, the social sector certifications are not very standardized. And the more you standardize it, the more you take the nuance of organizations which are doing very innovative and interesting work. So it is always a tough ask for certification of the cause or the purpose. So with the establishment of social stock exchange, I guess there is some sort of accountability and transparency that is coming into the organizations which are for a purpose, saying that please articulate your purpose, please tell us how you are going to evaluate it, let's have a evaluation mechanism, and please put the reports and so on, thereby bringing much more objectivity to social sector organizations than it was there before the social stock exchange, benefit corporation certification and all this happened. So please remember that even the public purpose or public cause social sector organizations are also moving towards the ecosystem of a for-profit enterprise, in the sense that there are independent people who are evaluating you, who are rating you, who are telling the people at large whether you can invest or not, or whether you can donate or not. Here the investment would be a donation, or you can make an investment in a low-yielding security or low-interest debt. So therefore, idea of a social stock exchange is an interesting idea. Though personally, I think stock exchange is a wrong terminology to use. It is actually a registry and a listing process, because what do you do with a not-for-profit share? You can't sell it. So what is an exchange? There is no exchange. There is only an exchange of a promise and an idea of or a rating. It is like a credit rating agency. So I guess it is much more of a mechanism for listing, mechanism for transparency and accountability. But they've called it social stock exchange. That's fine if they've called it social stock exchange. And if it results in greater transparency and a larger participation of the public at large in the activities, then that is welcome. In case of cooperatives,
Yeah,
it
so
is
I have a
difficult.
question here.
Sure, sure, sure. Sure, Anu.
Yeah, I have a question here. So you raise this very important point about, the more we tend to standardize, the more we end up losing the nuances or the capacity for innovation in the not-for-profit organizations. So can we examine this idea of innovation in not-for-profits? In for-profits, we know that there is a lot of investment that happens in R&D. It's a very long process. At the end of it, probably there is a product that is sought after, that is sold, and so on, right? But how can we think of innovation in the not-for-profit sector,
So,
in the not-for-profit
we'll thank you. Thank you.
organizations?
That's an interesting question. We'll break up innovation into two parts, Annapurna. One is a product innovation, which happens, and it doesn't matter whether it happens in the for-profit sector or the not-for-profit sector. Let's say if you're doing a product innovation, uh, and it is going to be that new product is going to serve the public at large. Let's assume that you know a good example is a drug discovery. Let's assume that you're trying to find a cure for blood cancer or something like that, right? Now, if it happens in the private sector, when it happens, then what tends to happen is it gets patented, there's an intellectual property, and there's a heavy price that the consumer has to pay in order to pay back for the innovation expenses, right? That's what happens in the private sector. Let's assume that this drug discovery happens in the not-for-profit sector. Then the discovery cost is borne by the donors or society at large or the government, and therefore the product is made available much more widely at a much cheaper cost because you're looking at a marginal cost recovery rather than recovery of the investment that you've made in the. That's as far as the product innovation is concerned. The process and other innovations, which is basically social engineering related innovations, are a little more complex. For example, if I have an interesting recovery mechanism which was there in microfinance, where I used group technology to recover, and I used embedded knowledge of the members to say whether the customer is good or not, it's an innovation, but it's not a patentable innovation. It's not an innovation it's an innovation that can easily be replicated, and it's also an innovation which is sort of in the edge. Why do I say it's in the edge? What I think is innovation today might be coercion tomorrow. What do I mean by that? Let's assume that microfinance agencies in the past would say group guarantee is a mechanism for you to repay, and if the group does not repay, the credit officer does not go away from the group meeting and waits there, which is essentially saying that you're publicly humiliating somebody for not paying. A nice way of calling it is, a sophisticated way of calling it is social collateral. And when it's social collateral, it is seen as innovation. When that becomes a problem at scale and when it repeats itself and people start identifying that, oh, this is held up because one member is defaulting and the village starts looking at that member in a very peculiar manner, it becomes coercion, right? It becomes customer harassment, right? It becomes also beyond the fair practices code of how you deal with the customer. So there is a very thin line that you draw between what is regulated, what is acceptable practice, and what is an innovative practice, and when does an innovative practice actually become an acceptable practice or an unacceptable practice. So that's a second part of it. And therefore, when we are looking at innovation in the not-for-profit organizations, we need to look at both the product and the process innovation and see whether the process innovation can become a regular practice. And also remember that every innovation is breaking of the existing laws, right? Otherwise, there's no innovation. You're following the good old practice, then there is no innovation. So you're breaking the practice. Sometimes you're even breaking the regulation and law. You're not breaking the law in letter, but you might be pushing the interpretation of the law in spirit, saying that let me try whether this is acceptable for the law, and the law will also reform. and respond. So that's broadly where it is. I hope I've not confused you further, than trying to answer your question.
No, that was very clear. See, but if we take the example, let's say, of microfinance, it is still, like you said at the beginning of, our conversation, that this could very well be in the for-profit domain, right? Uh, like banking, for example, is very much in the for-profit domain. Now, if we think of a large number of NGOs in India, which are kind of delivering services which cannot be easily, let's say, delivered in the for-profit domain as well, right? So how do we then, and we have a large number of development challenges. There are large facing lack of access to several services, that essential services that they need, and so on, right? So then how do we imagine, and microfinance still, when it grew, when the microfinance institutions were covering a huge number of clients, they went into the for-profit avatar, right? But
Yeah.
several of the services that are offered by social sector organizations cannot easily be for-profit avatar. So then how do we understand scale when there is a huge population in need of such
Yeah.
services?
So let's break this up. It's an interesting question that you asked. Let me give you let me indulge in the microfinance example a little bit, and then I'll come to the alternative. In the microfinance example, actually it was a market failure, and it was not necessarily a state failure. I mean, in retrospect, that's what we can say. Why was it a market failure? Market failure was because there was a formal market, which is the banks, priority sector, directed lending, and so on, which was mandated, and they were doing minimalistic intervention with the poor, right? Cribbing and saying that this is not working out. And there was an informal market which was at usurious interest rates. So you had two binaries in the marketplace. There was space for being somewhere in between. The problem is why there were nobody in between was because the price for microfinance or price for a loan is articulated as an interest rate. An interest rate is always articulated in the formal sector as an annual percentage rate, right? An annual percentage rate is also a proxy for the margin that you're making. So anything more than 10 to 15% is seen as exploiting the poor, right? And at 15%, you are not able to cover the cost, right? Look at the money lenders. Money lenders never articulate their interest rates on an annualized percentage rate. They will always articulate their interest rate on the frequency of repayment. 2 rupees per month, or 1 rupee per week, or 50 paise per day. So they are articulating it as a frequency of repayment, and they are never annualizing it. So that is one. So there was a problem of articulation. Second, when the NGOs came into the microfinance space, what they were essentially saying was, look, access is a problem, interest rate is not a problem for the poor. And we are NGOs. We are not profiteering from the poor. So therefore, the acceptability came because they were NGOs. Right? When commercialization happened, what happened was the model that the NGOs put in was intact. Nobody changed the model. They just changed the ownership and became profit. So it has a journey on what was essentially a market-based thing was sort of untouchable for the market because of the signaling of the interest rate. The moment the signaling became acceptable, it became mainstream. Now, please remember, access problem, let's assume the microfinance has solved. The next pain point is the interest rate. Now you can ask, why does the interest rate come back? That's because the access is no longer perceived as a problem. You're saying you're giving me the loan. Now I'm taking the loan. Now let me ask you about what is the pricing that you're doing. So that's the cycle that microfinance has gone through. Let me stop microfinance there. let's assume that you are trying to address nutrition or address a larger problem which is not amenable to commercial problem. Let's take Akshay Patra as an example. Akshay Patra is serving nutritious meals embedded inside the thing. Now, we need to figure out whether this problem that the social sector organization is trying to address is a problem of the markets at scale or a problem of the state at scale. If it's a problem at the state, which means that this activity will never be infeasible but still needs to scale up, then we need to go back to the state. Now, when you go back to the state, there are two ways in which you can do it. One is the Akshay Patra way of saying we will deliver the same thing, much more hygienic. I'm not getting into their other aspects of Sattvic food and whether eggs are being served or not. I'm not getting into that controversy, but I'm basically using Akshay Patra as a placeholder to say that here is an agency which is serving nutritious food for the children, cooked in a centralized kitchen. There, the problem that they're solving, please remember, Akshay Patra is also being singularly oriented towards solving the problem of nutrition for kids, nutritious food for kids in the school, midday meal. Right? Their costs are far higher than what the government budgets allocate. Right? The only way it will scale at the population level is when the government increases the budget. Right? So by doing that, they're actually not influencing the market, they're influencing the government to look at alternative ways of providing nutritious meal. The reason why I said Akshay Patra is singular because they're only focusing nutritious meal. The government program, on the other hand, tries to involve SHGs to cook. So there's somebody who's locally employed. There's a school principal involved. There are children involved. So it's a diffuse, decentralized model. So even when you're looking at these, Akshay Patra is looking at it, or an agency like Akshay Patra is looking at it as a midday meal nutrition program. A government program is looking at it as a slightly more holistic program, and how do I engage local people in this activity? And how do I use local resources? How do I engage with the local markets and so on? So, in a way, if I were to look at it from a objective perspective, assuming that the government program is delivering very good, effective meals, I would tend to go nearer the government program because it is much more involved and decentralized rather than the centralized kitchen of an organization like Akshay Patra. But that doesn't mean that Akshay Patra is not doing interesting work and it's irrelevant and so on. But there, you should be very clear that the activity ab initio is an infeasible program and it can work only through donor money and grants. And you can scale up with donor money and grants. I mean, I am not constantly people ask this question of what is the sustainability of an organization. In fact, I remember one of our students asked this of D.R. Mehta, who runs Bhagwan Mahavir Viklang Sahayata Samiti, it's a Jaipur food organization. And Jaipur Food Organization doesn't take any money from the beneficiaries. It didn't have a government grant coming in regularly. It did not have a huge corpus, and it did not have a single donor. So somebody said, what's your sustainability? He said, I've been around for 30 years. Have I not proved my sustainability? Why should I show it on your Excel sheet that, this is where the money is going to come from? That's one. Second, Mehtaji said something interesting. He said, I believe in God. Now you go back and look at the church, the Tirupati Devasthanams, or any of these things. What is their sustainability model? Dakshina that falls in the hundi. Faith, belief. So NGOs also run on some sort of a faith and belief that if their work is good, there will be some source of funding and so on. So I guess this sustainability is a little bit of a bogey, which is put by modern day philanthropic organizations to suit their Excel sheets, because their philanthropic money came from the same Excel sheets through which they did their business plans. Sorry, I'm being a little flippant about it, but I hope that's all.
No, that's I think a very interesting insight. Actually, we probably didn't think of sustainability of organizations that way. We go with the flow, right? So that brings me to one follow-up question, actually, right? So several tools we see nowadays in the social sector. several tools that are being used have actually come from the for-profit world, right? Several ways of assessing not-for-profit organizations, or even some of the donors insisting on certain forms of reporting and so on, right? Or what we call as, professionalizing the social sector and so on. So, how do social sector organizations then deal with this? What would be uh, an appropriate response, say, from the social sector?
Yeah, I mean, this is that's why I said that social sector organizations are complex organizations. The reason why I say that they are complex is essentially because they are constantly dealing with these mutually contradictory agendas. For instance, if I'm donating to an organization, let's say I'm donating to a girl's child's education, and I'm giving a 10,000 rupee donation, I want almost the entire 10,000 rupees to reach the child. Right? As a donor, I have no tolerance for a person who's taking the money from me, putting it in a bank, looking at the identification of the beneficiary, going to the school, finding out who's poor. That all costs. That's overhead. But somehow in the not-for-profit sector, overheads are looked at as something that ought not to be there. Similarly, professionals or professionalism or professional systems get covered under the broad category of overheads, right? So therefore, it is a little bit contradictory, and I think somewhere down the line we need to develop a larger discourse to say that if you want good people to work in social sector organizations and carry out the activities in a efficient and manner which benefits the public at large, possibly we need to uh, appreciate that there are some overheads. So there's always a question of signaling uh, between a professional and a not-for-profit. Take a usual thing. You would expect a not-for-profit person to travel economy, to stay in a small hotel, to wear modest clothes, and you'll never find an NGO person in a suit unless they're going to a foreign nation with a large donor, right? And you'll never find a business, representative wearing anything other than a suit for the meeting. So these are all issues of signaling, which we find it's okay for see because let's assume that there is an organization which is working for farmer welfare. Let's say in a distressed area like Vidarbha or something, and suddenly this guy comes in a air-conditioned car to visit the farmer. You will then calculate the amount of petrol that's used for the air-conditioned car and the overheads that is there in the car, and say if he had not done that, one more farmer could have been helped. That's a little bit of a false comparison, but we constantly do that. We constantly do that, and I think navigating that space is very difficult for social sector organizations, and it's important for them to navigate. At the same time, not go overboard. You know, you remember during the microfinance crisis, one of the allegations was, oh, one of these microfinance guys goes to US every 3 months in a business class ticket, and another microfinance drives around a Mercedes. Actually, it's a false narrative. How much does a Mercedes cost compared to the balance sheet of the entire microfinance institution? It might be an insignificant cost. If you're let's say 500 crore or 1,000 crore portfolio, 1 crore rupee Mercedes might not be too big, but still, because you're a social sector organization, Mercedes has a signaling problem, right? So you'll have to navigate that, because also you will also say that when you're working with the poor, you don't want to flaunt your wealth and the distance between you and them. So both these are there. Professionals come at a cost. They've acquired education and skills which would have cost them personal money, and therefore they need to be compensated fairly. But at the same time, it is at the cost of a possible benefit to one more beneficiary in the community. I don't think there's an easy way out in this contradiction. Uh, all NGO people have learned to navigate this contradiction in their own way. So typically, what they do, I mean, one of the nice tactics used is to continue to work for the not-for-profit at not-for-profit salaries, be sort of modest, and once in a while do a World Bank stint for and get on a mission and earn some dollars which are tax-free and so on, and manage your internal subsidy and so on. That's one way in which you can do it, but it's a complex thing. It's not easy. That's why I said social sector organizations are complex, essentially because they're catering to multiple bottom lines.
So
Yeah.
this brings me to one point. I mean, I just wanted to step back to the point of ecosystem, right? So when we are talking about the for-profit organizations, you said that they have their own ecosystem, right? In auditor, regulation, everything. There is or evaluation and so on. However, you were going to talk about cooperatives when I actually kind of diverted the discussion into innovation, right? So we were thinking, I mean, what about this kind of ecosystem for social sector organizations or member-based organizations? Is
It
that
is.
a problem? A problem? Is that problematic?
No, it is a problem, but that space is evolving. If you look at this entire B Corp movement, it's an interesting way in which the ecosystem is evolving. B Corp movement, benefit corporation movement, is doing certification on one hand, which has got nothing to do with incorporation. They're just certifying organizations. One part of that activity is certifying organizations. By certifying organizations, there is an internal learning process on can we objectively check off organizations which have diverse objectives on whether they're achieving the objective or not. Can we have a certification process through which I give a mark for each one of the performances? And when B Labs tried to certify Danone Corporation, they said their questions were not sufficient for Danone because Danone was a complex organization. So, in that sense, there is a mutual learning that is happening between corporations and benefit corporations certification. That's one end that is going on. The other end, the B Labs is trying to get the laws changed in several states of United States to incorporate companies as B Corps, benefit corporations. But these two are not related, actually. This is not connected as of now. But eventually they will be connected, I hope. Wherein if you are incorporated as a benefit corporation, it is necessary for you to get a benefit corporation certification, and not necessarily through B Labs, but through something like the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India or the Financial Accounts Standards Board, where you register as an auditor who's able to do this social audit. So I guess with social stock exchange, all this, that ecosystem is slowly developing, but it might be around 15, 20 years away before we have a very mature system. But I think that's an investment that we need to make. As we are making this investment, we need to recognize that these costs, certification costs, setting up these organization costs, and therefore we should be much more tolerant about overheads in organizations which are trying to be more transparent, because transparency also costs.
Yeah. So is the B Corp certification widely prevalent in India, in the Indian context?
No, I think Rang Sutra got the first B Corp certification, and there are some more in the pipeline. But it's fairly prevalent in Europe and much more in US. But it will take off. I'm sure it will take off with social stock exchange coming in, and slowly it will take off. In fact, the first attempt was made by Give Foundation when they said that when you are listing on a portal for donations, we want to be accountable to the donor, and therefore they were doing some due diligence. So that movement about accountability listing started as far back as the year 2000. So we are already 25 years. But this ecosystem development, please remember the modern day corporation evolved in the 15th century or something like that. And it's still evolving, right? So it's a long haul play. But I think lots of things are happening, and it's interesting that it's happening. See, the advantage of having the for-profit people come and look at the not-for-profit is that they are looking for evaluation parameters, and they also inform us on how we can do the evaluations. So that symbiosis between the activists, jolawalas on this side and the suitwalas on that side, their meeting is very useful and important, because that conversation needs to happen. One, we need to sensitize them about the social sector. They need to sensitize us about objective ways and professional ways of looking at a problem. Yeah.
So then, is there a preferred legal form, let's say either from a donor perspective or a government's perspective or within the social sector? So why I'm asking this question is, I mean, we know that Section 8 companies, they come under the purview of the Companies Act. And therefore, the ecosystem that you talked about, right, in terms of, the auditors or regulation, everything is already there, right? Which is probably different when it comes to trusts or societies or cooperatives and so on. So is there, in that sense, a preferred form? And
Yeah,
taking into consideration, what we discussed so far, the questions of innovation, scale, and so on.
I'll give a thumb rule. I mean, please don't hold me accountable to this thumb rule. The thumb rule is that if you are looking at a problem that is inherently unviable and infeasible and has a larger social purpose and can never generate profit, like nutrition, like vitamin deficiency, like a whole lot of things which are sort of not measurable. There might be interesting small examples of a for-profit organization working in that arena, but if you want to create impact, you necessarily have to be in the not-for-profit sector and constantly engage with the state. Recognizing the fact that if you have a solution, you will not be able to solve that at scale. It is only the state, and therefore you will only demonstrate to the state as to how the solution can be addressed. So that is for the infeasible, unviable solutions which are desirable. On the market intervention, where you think that this is a failure of the market, and therefore by my intervention and demonstrating to the market like microfinance did, you should possibly look at a for-profit incorporation at scale, because you're at scale, you will need capital, you need investors, you'll need to scale up, and so on. If it is not capital intensive and largely based on pooling and trading, a cooperative form of an organization will work. Please remember that if you get into a capital intensive cooperative form of framework, generating capital becomes a problem because you're not rewarding capital. So, having said this, obviously people will hold out Amul as an example, saying that milk processing is capital intensive, it is under cooperative framework and so on. Yes, it is. Let's not use counterfactuals as theory. I mean, that's my submission. Amul is a freak example of capital-centric processing, and by the way, Amul did not do a lot of marketing and brand building of its own till about 1970. For 25 years, Amul was just a milk procurement and processing unit. Marketing was done by Voltas. It was only in 1973 or 74 that the federation, that the Gujarat Cooperative Milk Marketing Federation, which now markets Amul as a brand name and is a well-known brand, came up. The brand was theirs, but distribution was done by Voltas. So you need to look at where is the limit to member-centric organizations and when do you hand it over and engage with the markets. It's not necessary that you need to own all the links in the value chain. It's important for you to own the critical link in the value chain, and then you could engage with the other links in the value chain because you have the power of negotiation.
Yeah. So then one question then, see, over the last probably 2 decades, we have seen that social sector organizations are behaving like extended arms of the state, right? They're implementing on several of them as partners of the state in implementing the government programs, right? Uh, Probably, if we go 3, 4, or 5 decades back, that was not the case, right? So, do you see this as desirable? Do you see that eventually that is the way? I mean, any thoughts on that?
Well, it is from the perspective of holding the state accountable. I don't think it is desirable. Ultimately, the state has to deliver, and it cannot keep outsourcing bits and pieces to others. It is the state which has to deliver. However, it is desirable in the sense that innovation happens with others delivering on behalf of the state. So, state certainly has to engage, but at scale, the state will have to take over or manage the activities itself. So it's a symbiosis between innovation and scaling up of the innovation. I think a good example for this is the SHG program, which was largely done not at the behest of the state by the NGOs in the first generation, and the state took over through the National Rural Livelihoods Mission program, took over more or less the entire SHG movement and started replicating it at scale. I think that's an interesting model. Um, there are people who say that, oh, there are problems with the NRLM implementation and so on. But I would grant that as a fairly successful program of the government with all its, you know, uh, disclaimers. It's a fairly well implemented government program, right? It's not as good as what Myrada would have implemented, but it's best
Yeah.
implemented in the government framework, right? Looking at the other programs that the government has implemented, essentially because NRLM is an interesting schema where it is the design is centralized, that there will be a community organization, there will be a SHG federation, there will be a state level rural livelihoods mission, SRLM office, and so on. But still, at the village level, it is decentralized in design and it is nuanced, right? They have local plans for dairying, they have local pashu sakhis, they have bank sathis, and so on. So it's a fairly interesting standardized design with an element of decentralization and with an element of customization. I think that's a brilliant design for a government program, in spite of all the inefficiencies and other things that are there. I mean, obviously, the government programs can never be as elegant as an NGO program, but I think it's a fairly interesting way of scaling up what an NGO could have done.
Uh, yeah, that's so. There is one interesting comment when I was attending, the course that you were teaching, the social enterprises and organizational forms. There was one thing that you said that that the success of the cooperatives is actually in its failure. I think Professor Sriram got disconnected. We'll just wait for him to.
Sorry,
We'll just
I
wait
was
for a moment
kicked
for him
out,
to
so
reconnect. Yeah,
yeah, sorry.
he's coming back. Yeah. So I was just talking about this. So you were talking about. I remember you saying that the success of the cooperatives actually is in its failure, in the sense that you don't require cooperatives, right? That maybe the market or the state are actually able to address the development challenges and needs of the people, right? Similarly, I mean, can extending this to the social sector at large. So what do you think is the say future of the development sector?
No, see, the reason why I said that you don't need. See, ideally, if you are in a situation of a perfect competition, then nobody is seeking excessive rent on any factor of production, right? That is economics 101, right? Now, we are not in a perfect competition, right? So, when we are not in a perfect competition, there is something that is distorted. You address that distortion by setting up a cooperative. That is one way. For example, let's take a modern corporation. One way of setting out a distortion is going out of the organization and providing a competition for that organization, and that is one possibility. Second possibility is within the organization negotiating for better terms. Your trade unions do that. Third response for that is the regulation saying that you have to engage, and these are minimum wages, this, that, and so on. Right? So there are multiple ways in which these distortions are addressed. And it's not necessary that all the distortions come only from the social sector organizations. But what is important in social sector organizations is once they highlight a problem, that problem at scale can only be solved by the competition straightening up or the regulation straightening itself up. So in a way, social sector organizations at some stage lose their cause if they are successful. Right? When they lose their cause, how do they reinvent themselves to see if there is a further distortion is a question. So social sector organizations naturally are constantly looking for distortions and trying to address the distortions. Now, let me remember the great Ilabat here. And one of my students, when I invited her to talk to my students and we had a dinner with her, informally chatting, one of the students, young students, obviously asked the typical dreamy question, Madam, what was the goal that you set out in life and what have you achieved? That's exactly the result of the questions we asked in the interview. Where do you see yourself 30 years down the line, right? So, Ilaban turned and looked at her and said, I have no objectives in life and I have not achieved anything as far as I'm concerned, because my life has been, I see a problem, I try to find a solution, I try to address that. By the time I address that, collectively and put our heads together and see whether we can address, there's another problem that is cropped up. So we are trying to address that problem. So it is a journey. So if we look at social sector organizations as a part of the journey, which is constantly looking for distortions, then there is a journey to be undertaken till eternity. Yeah.
So there are some questions.
Yeah, I can see one. It says income generated does not reach the workers who are actually doing the hard work.
I'll read out. Yeah. So if we look at it in the comments section, it's actually a longer question. So you can see the comment section. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's actually broken up into two parts, actually. Yeah. So I'll read out the question for the benefit of the audience.
Yeah.
There are some organizations that, under the guise of working in the social sector, exploit people to produce goods which they then sell abroad. They claim to have been working for the society, but majority of the income generated does not reach the workers who are actually doing the hard work, leaving them with little compensation. I think it's more of a comment or sharing of an experience.
It's indeed an interesting question. Let's try and address this question. Let's try and address this question, and on the basis of how much of the consumer rupee or the consumer dollar does the producer get, and how much does the middleman get, and what is the value add of the middleman versus what is the value add of the producer, right? And this is a constant, debate. And that this is where the cooperatives come in, saying that, look, let us take the value chain in our own hands so that the producer gets a major part of the consumer, right? So it is a question of negotiations. As long as the producer is negotiating from a position of strength, it actually does not matter what the consumer pays the middleman. Now, let me give you an example. I am right now sitting in Anand. Not far away from this place is a village called Kanjari. I used to be here 20 years ago, possibly even 25 years ago, or even 30 years ago, as a faculty at the Institute of Rural Management. And we used to go to a potter called Dayabai Prajapati, who's not far away, but 20 kilometers away in a village called Kanjari. He used to sell pottery, beautiful pottery. And I figured out that one day I went to Baroda and I saw in the market in Baroda, his pottery was being sold at possibly 40% higher price than what I would get at his doorstep. Right? So obviously, the question that Ranjit Kumar has raised came up in my mind. I went back to Daibai and said, Daibai, do you know at what price your pottery is being sold in Baroda? He said yes. And he also told me one more thing. He said, I also know when the guy exports what price he's selling. And he said, look, if I keep ruminating about what price the ultimate consumer is paying, I will stop doing pottery. Because then I'll start managing the export business. I'll start managing the shop. I'll start managing the value chain, and I'll not have no time to make pottery. So for me, the question is, I have put effort and easy giving me a fair wage, which is I have put a price tag on it, and am I getting that price tag? I mean, there is a sense of fairness which I think is fair. Have I negotiated that? Beyond that, what he does is got nothing to do with. If I keep worrying about it, then I'll stop doing it. Which is an interesting way of looking at it. It's not an answer for Ranjit's question because in his question there is a implicit assumption that the producer is unable to negotiate a fair wage and is only taking the wage that is being given. So the question is whether we are able to provide that power for the producer to negotiate a fair wage rather than looking at what is the share of the consumer rupee. Collective will help you to negotiate that fair wage. Trade unions will help you to negotiate that fair wage. A minimum price will help you to negotiate that fair wage. So, to that extent, social sector organizations need to come back and work with such individual producers to say that are you satisfied? Is this a fair wage? Can we articulate what a fair wage is in the value chain? Rather than saying let's occupy the value chain. If you occupy the value chain, obviously you'll get a fair wage, but you'll also pay a significant cost to maintain the value chain, which is a completely different skill set altogether. That's my long and unsatisfactory answer for a question of very important, of great importance.
Thank you very much, Professor Sriram. So before we get in more comments, I just wanted to take this opportunity to add that we are launching an MBA program, MBA in Development Management, exclusively for the social sector, and the program. The first batch will commence in January 2026. The applications are open now. The last date for applying is August 31st. So people who are attending this webinar can actually, yes, 3 more days to go. I mean, we had, you're also aware that we have done a lot of consultations with social sector leaders, with people working in the social sector, and try to, we are coming up with a program that is very relevant for the social sector, that is very thoughtful of the challenges faced by social sector organizations, and tries to prepare people to work in the social sector. And the eligibility criteria we have are that, we are looking for candidates with a minimum of 2 years work experience in any sector, and the academic qualifications for being eligible for the program are, a 4-year undergraduate program or a master's program in any sector. So just these two are the eligibility criteria: 2 years work experience and either a 4-year undergrad or a master's program in any sector, and a passion to work, obviously, in the social sector. That is what we are looking at. So please do type in your questions or comments in the chat box. Yeah, I think we have received some questions at the time of registration for the...
Sure.
Yeah, I think you can see some of the questions.
Sure. one of the things that is asked is how to build CSR NGO relationship. Um, that
Yeah.
that's not a easy nut to crack. Essentially, because the CSR portfolio of corporations are managed by the board of the respective companies and the board subcommittee, which is a CSR committee. Typically, what happens in a typical CSR committee is that they broadly make some sectoral, they come out with priorities on which sector that they want to work with, and make sectoral allocations. For example, an organization might say that I will allocate 40% of my budget to education initiatives, 30% to health, and some 5% to things that are on the run. So, in one sense, if you were to build CSR NGO relationship, you need to figure out what the corporation wants, what's the corporation's priority area is, and plug the NGO needs to plug within that priority area. That is one. Alternative CSR paradigms are when the corporation directly transfers the entire amount to a foundation which is associated. So there is a foundation like Infosys had Infosys Foundation, or Axis Bank has Axis Bank Foundation, and they allow the foundation to take a call where the foundation will have specialist people in the foundation's roles, and they allocate the projects according to that. Tata Trust, for instance, do that proactively, identify projects. So in a way, uh, there are some organizations where the proactive CSR NGO relationships are built, but rest of the CSO sector is managed by people who are on the other side, which are only looking at allocating profits and do not have a very good understanding of the social sector. So it's a little bit of a complex thing, and I think if any NGO wants CSR funding, it might be better to get into the loop 1 year before they are seeking funding, so that they can get into the loop at the planning stage rather than after allocations. Then that becomes complicated. So look at CSR funding as a long-term play and long-term engagement with the corporate. Yeah. The second question is the future of development sector. I think we discussed that, Annapurna, the future of development sector and where one can do work and so on. So I'll sort of pass that. Uh,
I think the second already answered. Yes.
yeah. They're basically saying that there are always problems and there are always problems to be solved, and you can pick up agenda on the run and remember Ilabat whenever you're looking at the future of development sector and what she said. Yeah. Well, how to deal with
Yeah.
systemic corruption and working in the ground realities, whether to compromise or take a stand. I don't have an answer for that. I mean, this is a completely moralistic and ethical stand, and we know that ethics differ from person to person. Compromises are made from what sort of compromises are made. All of us keep making compromises, and somewhere down the line, we say this much of compromise is okay, and beyond this is not okay. So I think that's a very personal value system based thing. There are some, I mean, in general, the NGO world is known to be unreasonable, and it's fine to be unreasonable. It's also fine to be unreasonable because if you start with the position of being unreasonable, then you know that you may lose out one or two cycles, but you know that you're not willing to make compromises, and therefore the counterparty will identify you for what you're worth, and then deal with you on very clear terms. That's the lesson that I've learned through my life.
Yeah.
How does culture differ, and why should members strive to work towards what they preach in the working environments?
Pratik,
Um,
if there are any more questions, we can take the. Yeah.
I don't think I'm capable of answering the culture question. This is getting into organization culture and
Yeah.
stuff. So beyond my pay grade.
Yeah. And this is Yeah, and this is not also the focus of the webinar, right? I mean, we did deal with some of these issues in the previous webinars. And yeah, the question about the difference in culture between social sector organizations and other, it's not in the purview of this.
Yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll just take this opportunity to uh, tell the audience a little more about the MBA program, right? So as I
Sure.
mentioned, we had several consultations with academics and social sector leaders, and what came out very clearly was that there was a need for strengthening the organizational capacity of social sector organizations, and that there was a dearth of professionals with managerial skills embedded in the ethos of the social sector, right? So we had after these consultations we had several rounds of internal discussions and reviews as well, and we designed the program which aims to build strong competent aims to contribute to building strong competent ethical and effective social sector organizations. And the program has interdisciplinary orientation. It draws from development as well as management, and it's a blend of conceptual and practical understanding. Uh, there'll be a lot of diverse social sector organizational context that we'll be drawing from in delivery of the program. It is a 1-year program and has a very strong field component as well in it. So the aim of the program is to develop a cadre of management professionals grounded in the principles of equity, dignity, justice, and sustainability. So the link has been pasted in the comment section. You can also visit the Azim Premji University website to find out more details about the program. And just to repeat, the last date for applying for the program is August 31st. Yeah. So I think there are no other questions. So probably we can, end
Yeah,
our conversation here.
I will just
We look
end with
forward. Yeah,
I will just end with a small dilemma, uh, and
yeah,
I mean that is where your social sector organization related questions come up. So let us take this outfit called Rangashankara in Bangalore, which is a place for performing theatre. Now, this is an organization which charges 2,500 rupees rent. I think they've increased the rent recently, but 2,500 rupees rent for the performers so that they can perform. So it is inviting people to perform. That rent does not even cover the air conditioning cost of the day, right? Um, and it's on a property leased by the BDA on a very, very subsidized rent, right? And the organization says that your gate prices cannot be more than 500 rupees over weekends and not more than 300 rupees during the weekdays, thereby trying to make a theater accessible to a large number of people. Intimate theater, it seats only 300 people in all. Now, obviously, if you were to ask about the sustainability of this organization, it's never going to be sustainable, right? The only way it can be sustainable is to then completely convert this theater space into a comedy circus place or a musical performance, charge 2,000 rupees ticket per head and so on, and it loses the purpose. uh, and Arundhati, who runs this place, says that look, there are days when she's standing there and somebody comes and says, "Oh, is it a 200 rupee ticket today? Sorry, I don't have enough money," and goes away. And it's heartbreaking for somebody, saying that they are from the nearby community and not even able to afford a 200 rupee ticket. And 200 rupees is a steep price for anybody who's poor. So, if we were to look at theater and the desirability of culture, cultural events, and theater, and making the theater this thing, then the society has to step up, saying that the government has stepped up by giving it at a subsidized lease. The community is saying that we will not charge, and therefore upstart actors, theatre enthusiasts can actually not, amateur theatre groups can come and perform. Of course, they have a gate collection share also. 15% of the gate collection is also shared. That's a back-ended share. But nevertheless, that's an interesting model which is inherently built to make losses. It is built to make losses, right? Because there's a purpose. So let us keep this as a desirable thing and support these organizations as we go along. I think that is somewhere when we are looking at the social sector organizations and the contribution to the society and try to put that into the economic framework. Sometimes let's also put them into a non-economic framework, saying that, look, there is a larger purpose in this. And here it's interesting, Annapurna, it's not even going to scale, because this is not an agenda that the state will pick up and have a theater in every corner of the city. So it's a very unique problem. So I just thought I'll park that problem with you before we close.
I think it's a wonderful example. It's a wonderful example to end our conversation with. And having been to Rang Shankara several times myself, I can I understand what you mean. The intimacy of the audience also actually feels part of the stage. It's that intimate, and have had the opportunity to watch several plays by young artists, young theatre artists, and so on. And it's a wonderful example in this context, right? We're talking in terms of scale, we're talking in terms of sustainability of organizations.
Let me give you one more nuance. Troop from Bombay wanted to book the theatre for a month, saying that, look, unless we book it for a month, it doesn't make sense for us to come from Bombay and put up a set and do the thing. Give us the theatre for an entire month. And the board said no. They said, if we give you for a month, we are denying local theatre people to come and put their plays up. So we will give you for a week at most, not for an entire month. Because it's not about audience. It's also about giving opportunity for performers to have enough opportunities to perform. So that's an interesting additional insight that I thought I'll give. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think we'll end this. Professor Sriram, thank you very much. As always, it's wonderful to be in conversation with you, to bring to the understanding of social sector. I'm sure there's so much for readily agreeing to be a part of this conversation.
My pleasure, Annapurna. Thank you. Thanks a lot.